In a dismal future, a blazing neon light from the past cuts a pathway toward tomorrow. Bounding into comics and Brett R. Smith present Escape from the Future.
Welcome to Escape from the Future, brought to you by Bounding into Comics. I'm your host and comic veteran, Brett R. Smith, and joining me today is another comics veteran and my good friend, Brian Pulido. Brian is the founder, publisher, and chief creative force behind Coffin Comics. Coffin Comics is an independent comics label that publishes the Coffinverse line of graphic novels, including Lady Death, La Muerta, Hell Witch, and other heavy metal-inspired supernatural comic books and merchandise. In the 90s, Brian was the publisher of Chaos Comics, where he created and wrote Lady Death, Evil Ernie, Purgatory, and others. He is also the guy who opened the door for me into the comic book industry, where he hired me at the age of 19 as a color artist.
I thought you were younger.
Yeah. Dude, it's great to see you, brother, and I really appreciate you doing this.
Right on, man. I'm all about it. What's up?
You know, I met you when I was 18 because we shopped at the same comic book store, Planet Comics.
Yeah.
Neil Kotler, still our mutual friend who introduced us, and I was still in high school. You took a look at some of my stuff in my portfolio, and obviously I wanted to be a penciler and inker, but at the time you saw something in my coloring and say, hey, I think there's something solid here. So I think what ended up happening was you sent me some tests to do. No promise of work, but just try these out, get them back to me, and then we'll go from there. And the test turned out to be adequate. And then I signed on as, I think, an apprentice at first under Jason Jensen, who was the lead colorist. Great guy. Sat over his shoulder in the back of the warehouse at the old Chaos headquarters for, I think, a couple weeks. And then eventually I got a 12 or 13 page story in Chaos Quarterly, Paul Pelletier, Mark Morales, and Lady Death. And it was off to the races, man.
It was off to the races. And then I definitely saw something in your work. And then I assigned you all these kind of cool images to do. Some that became part of pinup books or trading cards. Yeah. And in fact, we're right here today in the Pulido archive. And today you're actually going to see some of Brett's work because I have it on display because it's just that rad.
Yeah, and this is the days of markers. This is pre-digital, so we're working with Jason and I are working with alcohol markers, the Prismacolor or what is it? The Pantone markers.
Yes.
But we'd also use like charcoal pencil and all kinds of organic stuff. He and I would always study Michael Linsner. He was kind of like the guy because he used all traditional stuff. I think he still does to this day. Those were the days, man. The pre-digital age. So true. So, dude, it's the 30th anniversary of Lady Death.
True story.
And I thought it would be the perfect opportunity for our viewers to hear from you the story of how Chaos Comics and Lady Death came to be, because it's not only a great small business startup success story, but part of what you guys also did was really catch lightning in a bottle with the character, which is still hugely popular 30 years later.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, there's so many elements to this story, but it really grew out of Chaos Comics, grew out of a need to get the work out to people. I had myself, Stephen Hughes, my very small team, were very lucky enough to get a creator-owned deal from Malibu Graphics for Evil Ernie Youth Gone Wild. Now, the story and the journey to that is several years onto itself, but let's take it from there, where we were actually published. We were actually renegotiating the next Evil Ernie storyline, which was to be the Resurrection. And at the 11th hour, after making all the deal points verbally, Malibu pulled out. I think concurrently, maybe that first year of putting out Image was coming about, or I was just a pain in the ass, because I asked for everything. It's probably a very likely story.
To be young.
Yeah, to be young. So I had no choice. So really knowing nothing, not even knowing a single colorist at the time, I had promised and listed Evil Ernie the Resurrection, #1, to come out June 92, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. And man, it was just, for me, it was like climbing Mount Everest because there's so much for me to learn. the lucky part about it is we got Evil Ernie #1, the Resurrection out, and we kind of caught the tailwinds of this massive trend in comics where comics were selling insane amounts. Like around the time Ernie 1 came out, X-O Manowar was selling about 800,000 copies. We were lucky enough to sell 66,329, as I remember it. And that was really helpful because as a neophyte publisher, I made every mistake, dude. I burned that cash on all my mistakes, and it wasn't intentional, but it was a learning curve. So Evil Ernie 1, 2, 3, 4 comes out, and at around the same time, I offer a Lady Death calendar. And it was not lost on me that for every one Evil Ernie item I sold, I was selling 10 or 15 Lady Death items. And this was like my very early marketing at cons. You could see it right in front of your eyes. So we knew we were going to tell this character's story. And so we chose to do just that. So on February 9th, 1994, Lady Death #1 comes out. And it sold 51,000 copies. And it was great. But again, neophyte publisher. I had a chromium cover that probably cost, like, let's say for the sake of the story, like $1.75. Yeah. I cut deals with Diamond and Capital, gave them an extra 5% for extra promotion. So in the end, that book, which on paper should have been profitable, 20, 30,000 to move forward, was actually made about $2,000. So I go to Steven, my creative collaborator, and crying, literally a grown man crying, saying, I gave it my shot, and this is this is where we're at. For some reason, Steve kept the faith, and not long thereafter, we went to a New York Comic-Con of the day that was run by a guy named Fred Greenberg, I believe. So we show up on a Friday, Lady Death #1 hits the stands, $3.50 cover price, but right in front of our eyes, it started happening, this tornado. And by the end of the weekend, that book became an $11 book, and the demand was there. Not long after, Billy Tucci's She #1 came out.
Right.
And not long after that, Harris relaunched Vampirella. Those three books coming out in a similar time, the comics press dubbed that the bad girl craze. And dude, we were just off to the races. You were there. It was ridiculous. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, it was really special. I kind of came in on the tail end of Chaos in 96, 97. And so things were already really cranking. I wasn't quite there when things really sort of broke, but I was working at Planet Comics and was witnessing what was going on with the bad girl craze and seeing this indie market just come out of nowhere.
Yes.
It was akin to something like, maybe like alternative music or grunge. If I had to compare genres, our art forms where something sort of organic happens. I mean, there was lots of great music in the 80s, but I think, for the 90s, that's sort of the last organic musical explosion,
That's a fair appraisal, because if you remember, there was the hair metal was kind of dominant, and then suddenly grunge shows up, female singer-songwriter shows up. It just changed the game literally overnight. Like I was actually just seeing a documentary of all things on some people, like a band called Vixen, and they were rocking. And then overnight, they couldn't get hired for anything.
What is that? Is that doc on Paramount Plus?
Yes, it was good, man. 3-parter. It was good.
Yeah. I forgot about that. I need to watch that because, man. I mean, there's legit talent that came out of the 80s, but there was just a stylistic and a taste change. And then on top of that, it was kind of like it was luck that you had these bands and an audience that was ready for something new, akin to the bad girl craze.
Yes.
And luck is just where opportunity and ability meet. And you guys were frankly just in the right place at the right time. You, Billy, and Vampirella, of all things, which is an older character, which just happened to sort of hit the mark at the right time.
It's true. And then, since we're here in the Pulido archive, and we're going to continue, I'm actually going to start moving around a little bit to give people a look-see at what we're doing here.
Yeah, this is awesome. So this is like a museum you guys have.
It's a museum that kind of takes a look at a lot of the stuff that's been done. I'm going to give you a closer view in time, but if I may, if you please indulge me, I want to show your audience a cool Brett Smith original, which is on display. So we're going over here to the archive, and please take a look at the one and only Smiley.
Oh yeah, I remember doing that. That's Stephen Hughes.
So that's Stephen Hughes and that's Brett. The date on that one is 1996, and that's one of several that are on display here in the archive. So
Yeah, I
yeah, I'm just
remember.
spinning around here, kind of keeping it 3D, but I'm going to settle down here for a couple minutes.
Nice. Yeah, those were fun days, man. I think I'd crank out maybe a page a day, and I'd come into the office. Chaos was a small crew. It was all family, and it was a tight little crew, and it was a lot of fun. We were out at Scottsdale Air Park, and it was just it was just a wild place and a wild time. And and the interesting thing to me was being a superhero comics guy growing up, and then going into something which was more fantasy, horror, sci-fi, sword and sorcery type stuff.
Yeah, heavy metal.
Yeah, and I remember in the beginning, a lot of my samples. I remember you telling me that they were a little bit too Marvel. They were a little too poppy, which was, you're like, this is superhero stuff, and dude, it's good, it's solid, but we're doing like horror stuff. So you were like, study movies. You're the one that really got me into looking at cinematographers instead of other colorists.
Oh, cool.
And you told me to go down to Scottsdale Public Library and check out some books on cinematography, and check out these guys and watch these movies. 80s horror type stuff, John Carpenter and stuff, and study these guys and look at their lighting. And because that's what you want to incorporate. Between that and me just kind of aping my best way to do Jason on the page, and watching him, that's kind of how I started to think about lighting and color and stuff like that. And I still employ that stuff today, dude. I still look at Jan de Bont and, anything that Ridley Scott does, Tony Scott, I pull influences from film, and that's really directly related to your influence at the outside of my, the beginning of my career, where that stuff is kind of formative.
I mean, it really was. It's great to hear. I'm happy it worked, and it was like a worthwhile investment, because I thought right off the bat you had that natural talent, and I think that you had that natural eye for contrast, which I think that eludes people. I believe you either have it or you don't. So you kind of know that you want to separate the foreground from the background, and you want to find colors that really contrast and help kind of amplify stuff. I mean, our art form in some ways is so passive in a sense, because people are looking at it and they're just flicking a page. So we need to do everything we can to make it scream. So I think you always had that naturally anyway.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think there are definitely mechanics into how to create an effective image, and that goes for, logos to comic book panels to anything. I mean, there is a, there's a recipe there in a lot of ways, and there's tweaking that recipe in a lot of ways. The other thing that I was thinking about was being a comic book guy and being a superhero guy.
Yeah.
Growing up.
Yes.
The difference in the badgirl craze fans, the difference in the people at the cons, the people that would come to the chaos booth, was very night and day, because at the time we got all the girls, we got all the women.
That's right.
And a lot of them were really good looking, and it was crazy, because cons and comic books was always basically kind of a male dominated industry. And for the first time, especially with the character Lady Death, Chastity, Purgatory, a lot of these female heroines that you created, that brought a lot of women customers and fans, and they would show up at the cons. And of course we had this crazy rig behind us with lights and smoke machines, and you really brought kind of a rock and roll atmosphere to a con, which I had never seen before. It was it was like an event, in itself, even the signings and stuff.
Yeah, all that was deliberate, but it was also just an authentic expression. Again, at the top of this convo, there's an element of comics are not the performing arts, and anything that I could do to bring performance to it, to this day, I actually try to bring to it. Yeah. And thank you for acknowledging that during that time we had a lot of female readers, because we did live in a world sometimes where people are like, women wouldn't read this stuff. And to this day, a very big part of our readership are women who just totally dig the energy, the vibe of what it is that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think, talking about the mechanics, I still think that, there's always been a cheesecake element to the art and to the subject matter. And that's Billy, and that's Vampirilla. That's the whole bad girl thing. And it's just, celebrate in a lot of ways that femininity and beauty, as if I was looking at a painting by Vargas. Yeah. Right. So, I look at it from that standpoint, that it was unique in that sense, and that women like that stuff, man. It's not just men. Women like to look at beautiful women and beautiful art in that sense. Whether it's, like I said, Vargas or Michelangelo or anything.
Well, I think we could all agree that comics also is based on exaggeration.
Absolutely.
And idealization. So
Yes.
when I look at a physique of someone like Superman, Batman, or the Hulk, I realize that's an exaggeration. It's perhaps a wish fulfillment. It's something you can't even aspire to. It's perfect. And so it just occurred to me that we apply the same role or the rationale to female characters, where they're idealized and don't take crap from people, et cetera, et cetera. So I've always been fairly settled in my view on that stuff. And for those dissenters, it's like, okay.
Yeah. It's not for everybody, what's her name? Olivia DeBardines. I hope I'm saying that right. I have admired her stuff over the years. I mean, she's part of the Betty Page revival, just as much as Dave Stevens was with The Rocketeer. And I got to meet her and Dave at, I think, WonderCon one time. And, I rarely geek out when I meet celebrities or I meet comic book people, because I just see them as people, and they typically like to be treated like people. But I geeked out with Olivia, and I geeked out with Dave. With Dave, I was just it was just total hero worship. But he was so nice. Both of them are so nice, and they're such talents. But Olivia, man, talk about two artists that are just masters at the female form. And I think these characters should be aspirational. They're inspirational, aspirational characters, akin to Greek myths, Greek gods. I still think that Michelangelo, his David, is kind of like the first superhero in a lot of ways when you look at the proportions and whatnot. If you look at, because he's meant to look heroic.
Well, also the gaze that you were forced to look at him. He is on a pedestal, literally. You must look up, and that's the hero's gaze, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing. What's different for you and comp and comics within the new indie market in comparison to the 90s indie market? And after you answer that, I want to ask you what's similar as well for comp and comics within the new indie market in comparison to the 90s market with Chaos Comics, because I'm sure there's differences and there's similarities.
I think the number one difference between the two time frames is the fact that even in the 90s, the quote unquote independence market was broadly tethered to the distribution machine, Diamond, Cap City, Heroes World, etc. So our ability to be truly independent was kind of difficult. There weren't other chains of distribution. Where I would look at today is see there's innumerable chains of distribution in ways that people get comics. Things like obviously the comics market, the distribution market is back, and there's starting to get a little more choice there with the winter coming back. There's crowdfunding on the various platforms. There's people who get comics from things like Substack, I guess, and Webtoons. So I think, the ability to be independent and get work out to people has exploded in ways we didn't quite have previously. Now, I guess some of the commonality is that if you're really trying to make your bones in the field, maybe today, like in the past, you might go out to cons. And in my case, I would treat it like I'm a rock band and I'm going to go from town to town and meet a lot of folks and maybe engender people to the work and the vibe to create an audience. And I still think people could do that today, and they could do that live at conventions, but it also can be done virtually through the internet. So that's some of the difference I see and some of the commonality. But one thing I would conclude is that this time is it's not easier, but it is. It's easier to connect with the person who cares. When I decided to get back in the game to publish in 2014, I actually went around and I interviewed the captains of comics retail. And the inquiry I had is, what place do I have in this food chain? And respectfully, my conclusion was, I don't really have a special place. To me, in my view, that particular market is designed for the Marvels, DCs, and nostalgia. To me, those are the three broadest categories. And that's fine. I don't really have a beef with it. It's like, okay, that's what it is. So it's like, where do I got to go? And I had seen friends do some crowdfunding of some like ridiculous stuff. So I figured I'm going to throw my hat in there. And my approach is going to be different. I'm not going to try to do monthlies. That would probably be impractical in that form. I also thought like kind of the monthly premise, even in the comics market, it's kind of antiquated idea. You'll look at any comic, the most popular comics on earth, their number ones start very high, and then the sales for number 2, 3, 4, they just go down automatically. It doesn't matter who it is. There's something built into the cycle sheets of the retailers or whatever it is, I do not know. So I didn't want that kind of exposure. So conversely, we started using crowdfunding and chose to get into, I guess, let me back up a minute. This was my bet, Brett. My bet was, there's a guy named Stephen King, and he releases what he releases when he releases it. And he has a thing called the constant reader, and they follow. And my question to myself was, could I foster a constant reader, and would they follow? So that was the bet. So that when we jumped into crowdfunding and started working on generally on a quarterly basis, releasing stuff and shipping it right out, that was the bet. And so far it worked. And generally, we have a general rise in readership and backers and collectors and all that kind of stuff. Whereas my concern would be if I put my entire bet into the traditional comics distribution market, it would have gone in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I think the longer format right now is more suitable. And I think we see that directly reflected in the sales of manga, which is largely all long format stuff, long format stories. And, I mean, readers these days, I think you gotta give readers real bang for their buck. In order to get them to part with their money, whether it's $25 or $150. So I think the longer format, I think it gives them that.
So what we do is we're generally 48 pages to 64 pages of story and art for each story. And it's we hope that each story tells a story, but there might be a B and C and D plot elements that carry forward just, to keep like the overarching story, kind of keep people engaged and delighted to go after the next one.
I mean, if you're within that range, that is graphic novel to me. So I mean, I think graphic novels. I think Will Eisner said it's like, I think he kind of defined it to be something that was like 50 or 60 more pages, basically, which was just longer. It was just a longer form comic book. But with that extra real estate, you're able to tell deeper stories as well as get readers, retain readers, for the next one.
I mean, for me, it was really simple when I decided to jump into that format early on. So this is like our 10th season, so to speak, of crowdfunding. But even back then, it was right off the bat, it was like 48-page square bound. And that reminds me of books like Hulk, Future Imperfect, which just from a tactile point of view, I thought it had some gravitas. It had the nice square binder, the glue binder. It felt automatically like this must be important. Yeah,
you got cardstock. Back in the day, when you got a graphic novel, it was chunky and it was square bound and you had a cardstock cover, it wasn't staple stitched. And so, that was like a big deal to us. It felt like you were getting a lot of value. So I think that carries over to, your customer base today who still want that feel of something kind of chunky and bang for their buck. So that's awesome.
Yeah, for better for worse, dude, I've always said, like, we go for ultimate quality at all times. Like, even to our own detriment, it's like, we're gonna do it. That's it. It's like, for any endeavor that we put ourselves into, it's like, okay, we're gonna deliver the best possible quality that we humanly can based on everything that's available to us.
That was your standard back in the 90s, dude. I mean, there was a real level of excellence with the work that Chaos put out, and it's the same as I see that Coffin puts out today. And that's because you have a great eye, and you demand the best, and you hire people typically that want to do their best because it's a lot of fun to work with you and work.
That's it. I mean, my thirst, even to this day, dude, like now I'm 62, right? My thirst is still like today, what can I do that's different? How could I up the game somehow today?
Yeah. Since you're talking about the beginning of Coffin Comics and getting back into the con scene, kind of testing the market and stuff like that, what was the beginning of Coffin Comics and how many crowdfunded graphic novels have you guys done so far?
Well, as you and I speak today in March of 2024, we have just completed our 40th crowdfunding campaign.
Wow.
And we've delivered, I guess at this point, it's like 38 of the 40. And in this next 10 days, number 39, so we're always on track. But Coffin Comics started quite humbly. What had happened was I actually had a deal with a former publisher to publish the character Lady Death. And let's just say in broad terms, that deal went sour. And so I chose to sue that publisher for clear title and right. And of course, as things happen, that person chose to countersue me. And in the end, we settled. And in the settlement, I retained complete ownership of the character Lady Death, clear title, on October 8th, 2014. And it was always my intention to launch a Kickstarter in February of the following year to celebrate her anniversary of the time. However, as part of the settlement, of which of course naturally you can't talk about these things, but something that was just plain was that they were able to get one more story out. And how they chose to do that story about a month later was through Kickstarter. So they do a Kickstarter and it realized something like $13,000. Now, $13,000 is a great amount of money, but it would not have been enough for what I intended to do, for my plan. So I'm caught in this world like, holy mackerel, is this the best this thing could do? It doesn't feel like that. I've been out there, I've been connected with the people. What's up? So I still went forward. And I'm really happy to announce that at the end of our first Kickstarter, we realized $76,000. Now that was fuel capital that allowed us to reinvest in ourselves. And let you know that at this point, we are operating our little tiny business out of 3 storage lockers. Like we had 3 10-foot storage lockers. One locker had boxes of comics. The other one had like boxes and supplies. And the third one, we'd actually go in and we'd package up the orders and fulfill, just doing buying and selling. So that's where we were. The first Kickstarter does well, and we got some capital, but we needed every penny of that to flip to the next one and the next one and the next one to make it all grow. So that first year, we were holding our breath the whole time because we did 4 Kickstarters for about 250 pages worth of stuff over 4, and we were holding our breath, but it all worked. That allowed us to graduate to a 700 square foot building, which we walked in and we're like, this building is fantastic. This is great. And within a week, we're like, this building is too small. We can't make it in this building.
That's amazing. That's awesome.
So about a year later, we went to our former building called HQ, 4,000 square feet. Again, rock star, this is the best. And we decked HQ out, loved it for 6 years. And then late in the fall, we moved to our current location, which I am telling you right here officially online, that this is the final resting place of Coffin Comics, our 10,000 square foot Coffin compound.
That's big, man. That's huge.
It's what it takes, and it's good. It's not. I come before you and say it's not a stretch. Like, this is right for Coffin Comics.
Well, I mean, honestly, man, you got the benefit of a lot of years in the business, and one of the things about businesses is growing too fast.
Yeah.
So it's like, you're always cautious, and I'd imagine, just you want to learn from your mistakes, and it's just sort of like, you have the benefit of chaos and looking back over the years and seeing what works. But at the same time, this is a different kind of world in a lot of ways. But I think, anytime you're rocking and rolling, you just think that it never ends, right? It's never going to ebb and flow, so you go for the biggest space you can get, and you overextend because you just think that, everything goes on forever. But there's obviously, dude, a lot of crossover from chaos into what you're doing now. And it's like, the other publisher obviously did not succeed. They didn't connect. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that when I think about these characters, and I think it's pretty obvious for a lot of people, dude, when I think about Lady Death, when I think about anything that we worked on in the past at Chaos or the new stuff, but especially Lady Death, among all the characters, it's synonymous with you, to your credit. And I think that people obviously trust you and your team, and probably also what you brought to the table as far as visuals from the standpoint of the competition on Kickstarter when you guys first started out. And that's reflected obviously in the popularity and the sales and the units you moved, and the ability to go and flip it and do another one and then another one and keep building and building and building. 40 books now? That's
40 Kickstarters. I mean,
over how many years?
10 years. This is we're entering what we call our 10th season.
Yeah. And you're comfortably growing. It's not a microwave cooking. We're doing oven or slow cook. We're doing it in a smoker. You know what I mean?
No,
So
you're so right. So as a younger person on Chaos Comics, I made a multitude of mistakes. The good news is I like to think I learned from them.
we all did. We all
We
we
all
all
did,
we all made
man.
mistakes at Chaos
Yeah, yeah.
Comics and learned from them. So
Like, yeah,
yeah,
I mean, yeah, survivors learn, right?
yeah,
So
man,
yeah,
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 yeah, totally. It's invaluable. It's
I mean, some,
invaluable stuff, honestly. You
yeah.
know.
Well, yeah, the lesson is in the failure. It's not quite in the success. I mean, someone told me this a long time ago. It's like today's victory is tomorrow's ego trip. So it's like, just be careful.
Yeah, and I think just stay humble and grateful. I mean,
Yeah,
that's kind of my attitude,
yeah,
and
I agree.
things, even when things are tough, they can turn on a dime,
It's
in a
true.
lot of ways. So,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, life itself is very humbling, so I get it.
but that's awesome, but it's amazing to me. The story of your characters, almost remind me go to music of something like Kiss or Def Leppard, because
Yeah,
Def Leppard are on tour right now with Journey, and I just think to myself, and I saw an interview with Joe Elliott where he talks about surviving grunge and surviving the alternative wave, which kind of
yeah,
put them sort of on in the back seat for a while.
big
And,
time.
and he just said, a lot of it is just surviving, and
Yeah,
as Sly says,
just,
you keep punching all the time, and
yes,
and and it's just funny to me because Joe's like, we're gonna go and play, Houston, Texas tonight, and we're gonna have our original fans who are now grandparents
yeah,
or parents, and they're bringing their kids or their nieces, their nephews. You've got multi generations flooding to go see these bands, which were
yeah,
popular when you and I were young. And I think that's the same with what you're doing now. I think there's obviously a popularity there that people want to see more of, and there's obviously a lot of Chaos fans, but you're expanding your
oh yeah,
readership even
oh yeah,
outside of that, and that's what's exciting as well, is that
yes,
that popularity that you had back then, you can have now. And there's not a lot of characters, that resonate like that. Certain ones do, obviously, from probably the 80s or the 90s, just given the demographics and, Gen Xers out there,
yeah,
older millennials buying your books who were fans back then, but then it's their kids, and maybe their grandkids or their niece or their nephew, if you're an uncle like me, that you turn on to these things and they like them too. So it's
I mean, particularly
amazing.
in independent space, you definitely have
Yeah.
Hellboy. Hellboy's tethered to the Dark Horse machine and stuff, but it's like, really, if you take a look at the history, it's like I've actually just been independent.
It's amazing, dude. Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when back in 96, 97, when I started working at Chaos, were we not outselling Marvel?
For a period of time, it was one of these months where we were like number 4.
Right,
And I don't know that we were outselling those guys because of volume, but like on
right.
a per unit basis. And I would say that was actually one of my missteps, is that's what I wanted to do. Like I loved it. I loved outselling Batman and Superman for like 18 months. That was awesome.
Yeah.
It was a very difficult model to sustain, but that was the goal. We all like, cocky about it too. It's like, yeah, we're outselling Batman, and we did, because
Yeah.
in the Diamond Comic Distribution catalog, they had a thing called Diamond Dialogue, and it categorized the top 100 selling comic books, and they tied it to a concept called the Batman Order Index. Are you familiar
Hmm.
at all?
No, not at all. No.
So the Batman Order, I don't know if it exists anymore, but the Batman Order Index was established as like Batman was a very consistent seller for a long period of time. So it sort of said, if Batman is selling this, how much more is this selling and how much less in relationship to Batman?
Okay.
So a big measure that I adored all the time is like, we're beating the Batman Order Index. But I think it's,
That's
that
so
was kind of
awesome.
a fool's errand, but that's youth also.
Well, I mean, first, when things happen, things are special. They feel special and more important when you're young because they're happening to you for the first time. I mean,
Yeah,
I think that's part of it. But there's also something really outrageous about this small unit
yeah,
publisher, with a little office, outselling the big two, these big legacy dynasty publishers and legacy characters. And it was the thrill of the moment. I remember I was working for you guys when that happened, because I remember we all went out to celebrate, and it was probably, I think it was all the office crew, most of all the office crew, and Steven Stephen Hughes, and his wife
Mhm.
came. I think his son Chance, I think his name. I think he
Yep, that
came.
was. Mhm.
But just to give you an idea of what we were like back then, um, and what celebrating was, and it was awesome, dude. I mean, I loved it. I was just so I was excited to be there, frankly, because I hadn't really done anything, I think, which had been published yet, because we were 4, 5, 6 months out on
Yeah.
things. That's how far in advance we would work back then. And but the Chaos Crew celebrated at Applebee's,
Yeah.
and it was a feast, and it was awesome. And I, that's what we were. It was like family, and it was, there was nothing pretentious about it, but it was really much a celebration. And I remember asking my dad, he's like, "What are you going to order?" And I was like, "I don't know." He's like, "Well, don't order anything too cheap, and don't order anything too expensive." So I ordered I think I ordered a bacon cheeseburger, which was,
See, there you go. It's a good choice.
yeah, exactly. Just a little bit above the cheeseburger, the bacon added. So, but yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it was just so crazy. I had no idea how I was going to break into the business. I figured that, like most guys, you work the cons and you take your portfolio and you approach people. It's kind of like, cold calling. You walk up to somebody and start a conversation, whether it's an editor or an artist. And I've done that, but I was kind of, you opened the door for me because you saw potential, and there was an opportunity there. And again, it's kind of like what people would say is luck, but it was really opportunity and ability. And I took the opportunity, and never looked back. So it was a real blessing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those were just crazy days. I mean, I remember we would get tickets to like White Zombie and Filter. I remember we went in a limo. I mean, it was just crazy in a lot of ways. Like you were saying, Chaos was like, you're taking this show on the road from con to con, but like a rock band. That's what it felt like. And I've never worked for anybody since, and I'm not disparaging that, but because it was unique to Chaos, but I've never worked for anybody where there was that feel and that kind of reaction of the fans to us as well, in a way that was kind of like rock star, because we were very different than the typical comic book publisher that would set up and it was sort of static and whatnot. I mean, it was a real game changer. Plus, there was just the whole element, I think, to the characters and the stories that you were telling, and I think the caliber of talent that we have and the images and everything that we had at the time. It was really top-notch stuff. It looked great.
Well, let you in on not much of a secret. Like literally nothing has changed. Isn't that right, Jimmy Coffin? Like we still party like rock stars. And like when we throw a con, it's ridiculous and over the top, and learn nothing in that department. We're still like, we celebrate gratefully our accomplishments, and we celebrate our fandom, the whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's I got to participate a little bit in that, so a little bit too much. But it was, you guys do party. You guys throw a show like no other. Halloween party is just the greatest thing ever.
Yeah. We just finished Swornfest a couple weeks ago, which is a convention dedicated purely to Coffin Comics fans. And people come from around the world, and it is a focused event of maybe about 450 people. But literally, people come from Australia, France, the UK, all over the world, and it is definitely a bacchanal. Like it's hard partying, good time. And just a lot of love, a lot of fun, because strangely, given the material that we produce, like our company's mission statement is to provide fun and excitement in the domain of rock and roll inspired supernatural comics, like full stop. Everything we do is measured against that. It's like, are we being fun?
Yeah, totally. I think that is essential, man. I've got John Milius, Conan the Barbarian, one sheet in back of me here, and RoboCop stand up next to it. And when I think of those two movies, it's like John Milius has in the beginning of Conan, these are the tales of high adventure, and fun. And and I think that's what people want these days. They want escapism, and I think also the genres that you delve into are much widely more accepted these days and more popular. I'm looking at Dune, and I'm looking at the success of Dune. And, I'm a huge fan of 84 Dune. And I just saw it because it came to theaters for the 40th anniversary. If that doesn't make you feel old, I don't know what will. But 1984, David Lynch, it's a commercial failure, but I still think it's a fabulous movie. But I look at what Denis has done, and it's remarkable. And I look at the success, and I look at the box office, and I just say, wow, this is this is Star Wars level kind of changing and opening up the genre even more, and it's even more complex sci-fi than say Star Wars.
Oh yeah, sure.
And kind of deep.
Grown-up sci-fi.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, for you, I think that's great because it just means more customers are open to the genres that you guys delve into and tell stories within, which is awesome.
I also like it too with our like real life business partners, our banks and all that kind of stuff. It's like they're a lot more chill about it. Because in the past, like, what the heck are you people doing? And it's like, all right, everybody settle down. It's fiction. It's called fiction. Read all the books you like. It has all kinds of wild stuff going on. It's just that when words and pictures are presented to people, it's just like, whoa.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Now, visual storytelling, I mean, it is the most powerful medium that you can employ, whether it's film, children's books, comics books, graphic novels. It doesn't really matter. When you have words and pictures, you're going to leave a mark on people. And we love that. I mean, I don't think that's any different. I mean, that's time immemorial, going back to the Greeks. You know what I mean?
Going back to the hieroglyphics, the caveman wall cave paintings.
Right. Caves of Lascaux. That is, you could argue that is the first comic book or the first storyboard. I was talking about Michelangelo. I don't know who said it. I didn't come up with this, but somebody told me, or I heard it from one of maybe a professional who said that the Sistine Chapel is a graphic novel. I mean, it's told in sequential order, and cool. It's largely a giant story in sequential order. It's visual storytelling on a ceiling.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So let's talk about new stuff. What have you got going on now as far as active campaigns or new campaigns coming up?
Well, I appreciate you asking. Let's come over to a different part of the archive. We're going to just spin over here. So Coffin Comics never rests. So we actually have several campaigns coming up. I think the first one I'd love to talk to you about right here is called La Muerta, Lady Death. Mm-hmm. It's right behind me, and this gorgeous image is by Mike Diodato. So we're actually in the middle of, or beginning a company-wide storyline called Hellageddon. And this celebrates the 30th anniversary of Lady Death's story, kind of bookending first ever storyline called The Reckoning. But here in this particular story, which will be offered by a Kickstarter beginning, I believe it's the first Wednesday in May, which is 7th, something like that. Mm-hmm. These two will actually face off, because that's always fun about comics too, is getting the characters you love kind of facing off. And that won't come out in May. Now next, we're actually going into some very new territory for Coffin Comics, but something again that we're also excited about. This one is called Lady Gunfighter. Mm-hmm. Let's see here, let me spin this down around there. So Lady Gunfighter is a story that's set in slightly post-Civil War, and it is about a woman named Eliza whose family was killed by someone in the past. Today, she lives as a bounty hunter. However, she is cursed with pistols that have demonic bullets that could never miss. To begin her life, she was actually an Annie Oakley sort of person. And in this particular story, she will go on a quest to find the man that actually destroyed her family. So we are definitely taking some of the conventions that you might associate with Westerns, but we're turning them on their head. We're taking a look at that time right after the Civil War as we head west, and it's a lawless land. We cast our environments as somewhat apocalyptic, and our settings are quite horrific. We're looking at scenes and settings with rabid wolves and people with leprosy, and it's a very, very dire, high stakes quest. So that's Lady Gunfighter, and she will be offered in June. Our creative team on that one is myself and Mike McLean as writers, Joel Gomez, the artist of La Muerta, as the illustrator, Hedwin Zalvadar as our colorist, and Marshall Dillon, veteran letterer of all of our books, is our letterer. And I'll go back to a minute for La Muerta, Lady Death. That's all the Coffin Comics books are written by myself and Phoenix native, Tempe, Arizona native, Mike McLean, that I just happened to meet at a con, and we got along. And it was like kismet. It's illustrated by Allison Rodriguez, colored by TBD, and always lettered by veteran letterer Marshall Dillon. Now, rounding this out, and feel free to ask a question. You know me, I'll just go.
No, I was going to share this.
Please do.
This is the cover for La Muerta, Lady Death.
And that cover
Again,
by our Lady Death illustrator, Diego Bernard, out of Brazil.
that's beautiful. And who colored that?
That one is colored by Wes Hartman, and Wes Hartman out of Austin, Texas area is also our regular Lady Death colorist.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I've worked with him before.
Good guy.
Great guy. Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful, man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a beauty. Well, I think one thing about me too, Brett, is that I am currently still a comic book collector, and probably my sweet spot of comics would be from about 1974 to 1985. I just love 1, 2, 3 issues and done with the storyline. I like the high energy, exciting stories. I'm not obsessed with origins. I love things to move forward. So all those types of things. I don't like retconning. I don't believe in it. You will notice, you didn't ask this question, but I'll give you an answer to a question you didn't ask. If you read Lady Death in 1994 and you read Lady Death today, it's the same character.
Great question. Yeah.
We have never backed down on who she is and what she's about. We've provided continuity. We've never apologized. She never suddenly, I don't know, wore a spacesuit or, I'm up for an adventure in space. But I mean, again, she is the exact same character. I don't go with the times. And the reason I don't is because I look and admire other entertainment forms, and I look at AC/DC, I look at Slayer, I look at Iron Maiden, and they found something that works for them, and they work inside that vernacular, and they just keep working at it. Now, people from the outside will go and say, hey, AC/DC sounds the same, Iron Maiden sounds the same, and what I say to them is, you're just not listening, because they have their own language. So same thing, how I feel about my characters is generally it's like, this is the character for all time. There's not going to be like the character, I don't know, waxing soliloquies, changing how they see things, changing their costumes dramatically, maybe armor. I mean, I guess that's true. Like Lady Death had 100 costumes and 100 armor, but it's all like in the same universe. But anyway, you didn't ask that question, but I'm answering it anyway.
No, I think that's really important, dude, because today that's what we get. It's just sort of a mess, and there's no continuity, or you have to do a bunch of homework to read something. And I like the idea of self-contained short runs, which are obviously jam-packed with nice page count. But I think there's something to be said about consistency, man, and also playing by some rules, which people can expect and kind of depend on. It's fun to bend those sometimes, but at the same time, I think that you got to have canon. I just think that's really important, and I think it's important to adhere to. I think that's largely what's made these legacy characters so popular. Superhero, Marvel, DC, Big Two type stuff. So, but I think it's also the same with indie stuff. Even when you look at something like a total phenomenon with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I mean, those guys. Yeah. I mean, that's like once every 100 years. Yes. A couple of like freelancers really nail it, and they still kind of have, or at least I think Mark still has his hand in it, I think, to a degree. So, but it's that was so wild. But that's also, it's amazing when I think about the 80s and the 90s and the indie market back then, and it was strong in the 80s because the comic book market was really strong. And I remember a retailer saying that there was like a glut of stuff all over the place. Chuck Dixon and I have talked about this too. A lot of people argue that the 80s and the 90s weren't healthy markets, and they were bubbles, but there was a lot of great stuff, and there was so much diversity in the 80s and the 90s. And that's why you guys were able to do what you're able to do. And that platform you're able to use today, which is awesome. Lady Gunfighter looks very cool. I want to share that.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, this is awesome. So is this Paolo Pantalena?
No, this is actually Diego Bernard again. And I think in this case, I think it's Wes again. Yeah, nice. On the color.
Yeah, I know you've worked with Paolo before, but this guy looks a little similar, but
that particular shot definitely has a Paolo vibe. I can see where you're coming from on that. A Gunfighter is interesting because the supernatural element are the cursed bullets that can't miss. She is a trick shot to begin with, so some of the heightened fun stuff in the book is coming up with these wild trick shots you would never imagine, and also this very cursed nature that she has. This one is, one of my favorite story types is revenge. I love it. And I mean, our character La Muerta grew out of revenge, and we're looking at a very, very dark revenge story on this one, as well as a Western, and putting our own spin on it, because I haven't seen too many supernatural Westerns, and maybe that's just me, but Yeah, we just got really intrigued with the notion of telling this particular story of this particular character.
I don't understand why there aren't more westerns, because I think that that's another genre which, when done right, can be really, really popular. It's just a lot of the times they don't adhere to kind of, I think, a lot of the ethos of the westerns when you go back to John Ford and the guys that sort of constructed those, or at least constructed the recipe, if you will, to make a successful one. You know, I think about something like Shane, you know, or even Quick and the Dead, man, you know, to look at something modern that Raimi did that I think also was kind of a callback to some of those older westerns. But it's a great genre, man, and it's so American. It's, you know, there's nothing else really like that out there in history. So
well, it's funny you say that too. It's like, I understand that the Western as Western is not being utilized as much, but in story form, everything's a Western.
It is.
Like Star Wars is a Western. Usagi Yojimbo is a Western. So many story constructions are Westerns. So, but like you, we love them. I love the John Ford Westerns. Unforgiven obviously was amazing.
Huge.
What we haven't seen a lot of is the supernatural Western or straight up horror Westerns. So there's a particular Western, if you haven't seen it, that I really adore, and it was a touchstone tonally for us. And it's the original Django, starring Franco Nero. It is the only known horror Western, and it is a brutal revenge story. I think you could get it on Amazon, totally worth your time, utterly unique and completely Western.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I haven't heard of that, but I will check that out.
Yeah, I am not sending you wrong. I'm not doing you wrong. It's a good one.
Yeah, I don't think have you ever done a Western before, or is this your first time?
First Western, but I've loved them my whole life.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, I think about I was thinking about Young Guns the other day as kind of one of those ones that, for obvious reasons, for very commercial reasons, you know, having a bunch of brat packers as your main characters, you know, but also they told a great story, and that was Dean Cain's dad. That was Chris Cain who did that, who was actually a really talented guy. Didn't work a lot, but he did That Was Then, This Is Now, which is a good movie. And he did The Principal with Jimmy Belushi, which is really good. That's awesome.
A pretty diverse group of movies. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, I mean, I love a good Western, man. So I hope to see more made. And you and I, you know, we're huge film fans. So I think it's great that you're bringing something popular from film into comics.
Yeah, we'll give it a shot. It's interesting too. Like, we didn't know. Like, a lot of this stuff is enthusiasm. So we're gonna do it, and it is our hope that we connect with our fan base. But when we were previewing Gunfighter, like, people were just going bananas here at Swornfest, and the buzz that we kept hearing is Gunfighter. It's like, all right, great.
Okay, so this next one that I'm going to share, I just got to say, you know, this guy, he looks familiar to me. He looks very familiar to me.
Well, if you're a fan of ultra-violent comic books with a bit of humor and some heart, this book would be for you. I am the creator of Evil You Know Who, but I am here to let you know that the two actually don't have a lot in common.
Right.
So Evil You Know Who actually was an undead teenage psychotic who controlled the dead, and arguably was bad. This particular character, Mike Morg, is more of an innocent Frankenstein-like character, where he is a kid who's going to a metal show with a bunch of his friends. They are abducted and they're brought to a scientist's lair, and they're actually forcefully killed by design, because this mad doctor has what he would call a mother lightning. He is exploring the control over life and death using lightning. So, using it on Mike and his friends, unfortunately, Mike is resurrected, and you will notice his hands are alive. And what he learns is that they are called kill fists. They are soul-demanding fists. If Mike does not feed them, he's gonna die. So he is a different character, but being that he has those kill fists and near invulnerability, this comic makes for some very over-the-top, super-duper ultra-violence. Now, he does have a sidekick named Ratso, and that was a guy named Riley Ludix, whose brain gets put in this poor rat body. And so these two guys together, Mike Morg and Ratso, are really just trying to navigate getting away from this mad scientist and his horrible orderlies. And of course, there just comes a time where he just can't take it anymore, and he's gonna It's going to try to put all those guys to rest. So that
Right.
is the broad story of Mike Morg. That one's co-written by myself, Mike McLean, illustrated by Jose Luis. It's currently being colored by Elmer Santos and lettered by veteran letterer Marshall Dillon.
Nice.
And this is our second dude comic in 10 years, but we're feeling that energy. It's like we need to do an ultra violent, funny story with heart.
That's awesome. Well, hey, humor, man. I mean, that's universal. So, I mean, you're broadening your genres. I think that's really smart and awesome. This guy also looks like Mike. When I looked at him, obviously he looks like evil, you know who. But when I looked at this, I was like, that's Mike.
So who you're referring to is Mike Flippin,
right,
who was the graphic designer for Chaos Comics at the time. And I'm here to let you know, Brett, that Mike Flippin is still our graphics designer. He and I have been working together for 32 years, and absolutely Morg totally looks like Mike Flippin.
I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it's a nice choice. So yeah, Mike's a great guy, absolutely great guy. I learned a lot from that guy. So.
Oh, dude, to this day, like one of the secret weapons, not so secret weapons of Coffin Comics, how we're able to be so productive with such a finite crew. Yeah. I mean, there is nothing I could throw at that guy that he can't bet back. It's incredible.
Yeah, totally. So is there a Lady Death upcoming?
Coming in August. We do have a dedicated Lady Death storyline, and it's called Lady Death Eternal Sabbath. And that, again, that's another 56 pager. We have a very, very interesting artist that totally blows my mind. They're contributing, and I can't announce it yet. What I could announce that's kind of fun is on this particular story, we have some folks who have done very few Lady Death covers. So that'd be including Puppeteer Lee. Mm-hmm. You see the aforementioned Mike Diodato. We have a really beautiful Frank Cho in this next one.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I have had the pleasure of working with Frank on Savage Wolverine, and man, I mean, his stuff is just awesome to work with. It is so much fun. He's a master illustrator, man. It's just incredible.
So, dude, we signed Mike for 5 covers. We got them all in, and I just went back and I just luxuriated in this guy's work.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as everybody thinks he's rad, I don't think they realize just how rad he is.
He's so good. Yeah, his figure drawings. I've got a book of his life drawing, and when you see that, you kind of get a little bit more perspective from the standpoint of how good he is at drawing not only the female form but just the human form in general. He's just a master. It's like looking at old masters in a lot of ways. But he's a comic book artist. He's an illustrator.
He is. It's pretty fascinating. The cover that he did for us, is pen and ink. But he literally uses a ballpoint pen for a portion of it. For the instead of her cape and some of the other noodly details, it's literally a ballpoint pen.
Was there something for Lady Death Demonicron?
Yes. Do we have? So this is incredible. Something we've been working on since early September. We are launching a Lady Death console video game Kickstarter named Lady Death Demonicron. So this is going to be side-scrolling, punch 'em up, 90s style. That's an ode to stuff like Mortal Kombat and all the side-scrollers.
Wow.
And it's going to be done with traditional comic. Well, it's going to be animated as a traditional comic book.
Oh,
it features a story by myself, Mike McLean, and art director Ash Nichols. Our art director is Anthony Spey, who also works with us separately. And we expect to have we're going to launch a Kickstarter on April 24. Please sign up, folks, if you like, at ladydeathgame.com. And it will take about 2 years to complete the work. The story is pretty much broken into shape. But yeah, there'll be a lot of work to do, and it will be available for most platforms. So we are crowdfunding it, but we realize that even through crowdfunding, we may not get the totality of what we're looking for, but our budget to produce this game is $1.5 million.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not cheap to do something like that, man. And it's also, it takes time. I mean, it's time intensive, especially if you're talking about, I guess, traditional animation in this case. Yes. So reminds me of Dragon Slayer or kind of Space Ace. Is that sort of the direction?
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. But I love the 90s appeal and look, that, with pixels, and something
Totally.
that's kind of got that texture. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll almost look like an animated. Now we're not going for the new style 3D and all that kind of stuff. It is just
Right, right.
even on the site, and there's a dedicated Facebook page by that name, Late Death in Omicron.
Mhm.
We're starting to show some of the animation already, and
Oh, wow.
yeah, it looks like nice traditional animation with a nice deal of movement, undulating, of her
Mhm.
body, and the story is a lot of fun, and we do consider the story canon. And it does take Lady Death to places she has not been to before, so it'll be
Wow.
fun. Yeah, it's gonna be that's a fun one.
Great idea, dude. That is a lot of fun. I mean, gaming is huge, man. It's huge. You know,
It's huge.
that's an area to expand into where there's growth, especially if you've got a popular character.
Yeah, it's fun too. Thank you. Because the that it's a story is kind of cool, and all credit to Ash Nichols and the Art of Play team. Those guys are veteran game makers. They've worked on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Spidey, but they did really have a thirst for doing something indie. So we're gratified we're working together.
Okay, so you're an older Gen Xer. I'm a younger Gen Xer. You're more of a pinball guy. I'm more of a video game guy as far as like growing up, but that's just
Yeah.
the eras that we grew up in. The games today are just so radically different in that you can have these deep stories and
Yeah.
these arcs.
Yes.
Unlike we had with arcade or even the stuff that we had,
Yeah.
Atari, ColecoVision, Super Nintendo, Genesis. I mean, none of them really had quite this element of
Yeah.
drawing you in the same way you would with like a movie.
Yes.
And I'm just curious, do you play any of these games?
I don't play a lot, and the reason I don't play a lot is I spend all my time creating.
Same here, man. I have a hard time. The joystick or whatever you want to call it, the controllers, man. I mean, they're daunting. I mean, there's to me, it's like there's too many buttons. I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to do with all this? And because we came up on very simple controls, joystick, 2 buttons, or even the Atari stuff was really simple, but it's more immersive in that. So I suppose that's probably what you have to have in order to do more things inside these worlds because they're more complex. But I have a hard time, man. And I think also for me, it's also just time management. It's sort of like, if I'm going to spend my time, it's going to be where it's at highest and best use, and that's creating rather than,
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, the truth of the matter is when I started playing video games, late 80s into the 90s, etc., I was not exceptional. So I kind of concluded for myself, I'm like, okay, what's the point here? Because I am like, I could do this game for all time, and I'll be lucky if I ever complete it, and I'm super duper average. So, it's sort of like, you kind of get to a point where it's like, okay, maybe this one isn't for me. I think I'll go write a story.
I think we were all good at least 1942, or 1943. Those were 2 really easy games. But you had to have skill to work those games back then, as well as pinball. That's the other thing. That does take skill.
Oh, it does. Yeah. I mean, and look, big up to the people in today playing games, because I understand it's a big industry, and it is a skill set clearly, and it's a skill set I just don't have. Yeah. I also am not an Olympic swimmer. It's just one of those things.
I think to a large degree it's generational, and I think that's okay. I don't, there are certain things that are going to become popular that aren't popular with our generation, and that's cool. But I think gaming's amazing. I mean, that whole industry, I don't know how many billions of dollars it is, but it's just
it's massive.
It's massive, dude. Yeah, and it's only getting bigger. All right, so last question.
Yes.
I know outside of comics, like me, you're a huge movie geek and lover of all things cinema.
Yes.
We're both very passionate about that.
Yes.
In fact, you've worked in film. You're a director.
So, I've done that.
What are you watching right now? Any new TV shows or movies you can recommend?
Well, some I'd love to recommend. So in particular, I love horror. I like everything, right? But the sweet spot for me is horror. So I'd recommend 2 horror films that I thought were knockouts. The first one is the movie Talk to Me. Super simple. The premise is really simple. These kids on TikTok, I think it is, are trading around this hand that when you take hold of it, causes demonic possession. And the kids are doing it almost kind of like a 1-minute high. And if they could, detach in a minute, they're going to be okay. But if they stay too long, something's going to happen. And I thought this story, first of all, just on the surface, it was scary. It didn't even feel like a movie. So I recommend that one. And I think it delivered the whole way. And it also had like a nice subplot and what it was really metaphorically about. But man, just for scares, I thought it was great. And I must admit, like I like a good demonic possession story. So because of that, I'm going to recommend another story, and I believe it's on Shudder, and it's called When Evil Lurks. Now, this is an import. I think it's from Argentina, and the premise is really cool, and it's brutal. I mean, it takes no prisoners. So the premise is something like this. An apparent evil entity gets into a town, and if it's not stopped, it actually spreads, and it spreads through very primitive things, animals and children. And man, what happens in this story obeys no rules that we would have in the United States, goes places you wouldn't imagine, and is authentically frightening. So that's When Evil Lurks, and I do highly recommend it.
Cool.
Now, for those of you who like television, I have 3 series I'd love to recommend on Netflix that I believe are little seen. So the first one is Black Summer. This was 2 seasons starring, I think it was, oh gosh, what's her name? Jamie, the gal from Pearl Harbor. Anyway, it gets you at ground zero of some sort of zombie-like outbreak. And it is right in the moment of it. And it lasted for 2 seasons. There's 6 episodes each, and they're intense. There's actually one episode that the great majority of the episode is one zombie chasing one man. And it's excellent. But it really delivers. Okay, next I would love to recommend, I think it's a French produced series called Into the Night. Here's the premise, if I could boil it down. A dignitary is getting on a plane. He acts completely irrational, holds a gun to the pilot's head and says, you got to get this plane moving now. This is pre-dawn. You can see the dawn on the edge. So they comply because it looks like he kidnapped the plane, terrorized the plane, and they start taking off. What it turns out is that for whatever reason, suddenly, everything that the sun hits, it destroys. So, and we're talking everything: human life, plant life, the chemical makeup of gas, etc. So these people on the plane always have to stay in the night, even if they have to refill fuel. So that was also 2 seasons. I don't know if it'll go on. Pretty good. The third and final I'd like to offer up is called To the Lake. Now, I think this is some Eastern European produced idea. And here's the idea, pretty simple. We are in like some sort of Eastern Bloc country, and there's a major city. And people become aware that there is some sort of plague-like thing happening in the city, and everyone evacuates. And it's a story of everyone evacuating and everything happening. Small group of ever-changing groups of people who choose ultimately to go to a remote lake, and it's everything that happens. So the commonality of all this stuff is there's a lot of chase, there's a lot of forward motion, the stakes are really high, but those are some of my current recommendations that I've enjoyed.
There's a lot of reflection to real life in a lot of those things, dude. It's just insane. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're all fun. They'll deliver.
Are you a fan of S. Craig Zoller?
I'm not sure I'm familiar with the person.
Bone Tomahawk, Brawl in Cell Block 99, Drag Across Concrete.
Okay, I know who you're talking about, and I got to get caught up on that. I saw the preview for Cell Block, and I saw Bone Tomahawk back in the day. Yeah.
Yeah, Dragged Across Concrete is also very good. Mel Gibson, Vince Vaughn, I think Brawl in Cell Block 99 is my favorite. Chuck Dixon and I are like huge S. Craig Zoller fans, and Ridley Scott's directing something that he wrote coming up soon, which will be amazing. But that guy, every time I think about that guy, for some reason I think about you. I'm just like, Brian would love that guy because he's just uncompromising.
Right on.
All right. Well, sadly, we're out of time. Brian, what's the best way our viewers can support you and Coffin Comics?
The best way viewers can support Coffin Comics is simply sign up to our newsletter. See if what we're offering is something you'd like. To do that, go to coffincomics.com, and on the upper right, simply enter your email. We do a weekly newsletter where we tell what's going on, what's coming up, stuff about our Coffin Comics culture, etc. And that's the best way to reach us.
Awesome. And they can get back issues at coffincomics.com. So at coffincomicsshop.com, we actually do offer all our what we call our evergreen, our library of our previous 40 main premiere editions, also collections in terms of trades, omnibus, art books. We do have like a full stock of all that stuff, and we do keep it all in print. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's what you got the warehouse for, is all that stuff, and your merch, because you can find all kinds of great merch there as well. All right, so for more videos like this one, subscribe to Bounding Into Comics channel on YouTube and Rumble. Also, make sure and like this video and leave us a comment. Are you reading Lady Death or other Coffin Comics titles? If so, let us know what you think in the comments. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.